This is Mark 1:21 through 45. And they went to Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and was teaching. And they were astonished by his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority and not as the scribes. And immediately there was in their synagogue a man who was with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying out with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region of Galilee. And immediately he left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law lay ill with a fever, and immediately they told him about her. And he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. And the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or oppressed by demons. And the whole city was gathered together at the door. And he healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. And rising very early in the morning, where it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him, and they found him and said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." And he said to them, "Let us go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out." And he went throughout all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling, said to him, "If you will, can you make me clean?" Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, "I will, be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. And Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once, and said to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing that Moses commanded for a proof to them." But he went out and began to talk freely about it and to spread the news, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places. And people were coming to him from every quarter. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Lydia. What we've been doing this spring is looking at what is the earliest gospel account that's ever written, which is what we refer to as the Gospel of Mark. And the Gospel of Mark, if you ever look at it on your own, you'll notice it has 16 chapters to it. None of the chapters or divisions like that are original. It's just kind of somebody came in later and divided it up to make it a little bit more easier to read. But it's now 16 chapters long, and it very conveniently splits into two halves. The first 8 chapters are really devoted to answering the question, who is Jesus? And the second 8 chapters are devoted to answering the question, and what did he come to do? So what we are doing, Lord willing, all through the spring, really up until the start of the summer, is we're just going to camp in those first 8 chapters and take that question up for ourselves as we look at these stories, as we look at these accounts, and really try to get an answer. Who is Jesus? How do we make sense of who he is as he is presented in the scriptures? And our passage that Lydia just read for us, it's the final 4 stories in the last chapter of Mark chapter 1. And you can see I tried to break up the stories so you can see that there's actually 4 different scenes, 4 different vignettes here. And really they all take place over the course of one day that spills over into a second day. We don't know for sure, but all of this stuff that we just read really could be within 24 hours. So I think what we have here more or less is a day in the life of Jesus. And I think it's incredibly helpful because it shows us, number one, the power that we need. There's a power that we need. And then secondly, it shows us there's a purpose that we need. But also it shows us how we get them both. So let's look at these 4 stories together and just try to understand it through that lens. The power that we need, the purpose that we need, and then how we get them both. First, the power that we need. The first story from, it's verses 21 to 28. It's on the Sabbath day. And Jesus goes to his local synagogue in Capernaum, and he is invited to teach. And look at verse 22. It says, "And they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority and not as the scribes." Jesus is teaching in a way that's totally different from anything that anybody had ever seen, because in that day and age, when someone would stand up to teach, they would never say anything declarative from their own being. They would say, well, Rabbi so-and-so said X, or Rabbi such and such said Y. But Jesus says, no. I say to you Z, or I say to you this, verily, verily, this. And people have never heard anybody talk like that. It is so direct, it is so confident, it's so refreshing, so engaging. And in the middle of this teaching, it says, a man with an unclean spirit, a demon-possessed man, stands up, interrupts the sermon, and starts shouting at Jesus. So church just got weird for Jesus in this moment. And I'm sure for some of you, this story might get weird, where you're like, okay, this is time. This is where I check out. This is when I start rolling my eyes because demon-possessed people are now showing up in the story, and this is just too, implausible. And let me just make a quick aside, because that's not this. I mean, I wish you could say more about this. It's not the point of this passage, but I feel like it's worth saying, but we won't make it the point of the sermon. But I will say this. The Bible assumes a supernatural worldview, meaning that there is more to the world than just the physical universe. And in fact, most people in the world assume a supernatural worldview. I came across this study this past week. I thought this surprised me. There was a recent study on religious views in the U.S., just came out recently, and it said that 4.6% of the American population, 4.6 of the population claims that, quote, they do not believe in anything beyond the physical world. Less than 5% says, I don't think there's anything beyond the physical world, which means that 95% of Americans believe that there's something. It may not be God. They may not say it's Jesus or this, that, and the other, but there's more to the world than just the physical universe. And in fact, you hear this language even in modern day recovery circles where people speak about a higher power. There is almost a universal understanding that there's more than we can explain. And so it's logical to conclude, if there is a good, benevolent spiritual being, and if there are good, benevolent spiritual beings, then it stands to reason then there would also be bad or malevolent spiritual beings. And the Bible just assumes there's a lot more going on in the world than we realize. Aside over, Jesus gets interrupted in the sermon. What does he do? Well, look at verse 24. It says he rebukes the demon. He says, be silent, shut your face, and come out of him. And instantly, this guy is healed. The demon leaves him. There's not an altercation. There's not an epic battle between the two of them like Dumbledore and Voldemort at the end of the Order of the Phoenix. It's just Jesus speaks, and it's done. And look, everyone is astonished. Verse 27, they say, a new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. So here's the first thing I want you to see. Jesus possesses an authority, a power that is unlike anything that anyone has ever seen. He just says words and stuff happens. People are blown away. But here's the other thing I want you to see. How does Jesus use that power? How does he use his strength and his might? He uses it to heal. He uses it to restore. I mean, look at the contrast between the first story and the second story is interesting. Look at the second story, verse 29 through 34. It says they leave the synagogue. They go to Simon and Andrew's house, and there we learn that Simon's mother-in-law is laid up in bed, sick, with a terrible fever. Look at verse 31. I love this. It says, and he, that's Jesus, and he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and the fever left her, and she began to serve them. I mean, that is a tenderness that is really unnecessary. I mean, as we just saw, he can just say stuff and stuff happens. He just went from facing the forces of darkness, and now he is tenderly taking this woman's hand and just lifting her up out of bed because she's been sick. Here's what I want you to see is human power tends to exploit the weak. That's what we do when we're in power. We take advantage of the weak. Divine power bends down and helps up the weak. And what you see with Jesus is this bringing together of two dynamics that are really hard to put together for us, where you have power and strength and ferocity and tenderness and kindness and gentleness. And with Jesus, you have both, and you need both. I mean, think about this. Let's just say that you're friends with the Hulk, the Incredible Hulk. You would feel protected by him. You would feel defended by him. You know you're in safe hands. You got the Hulk on your side. You wouldn't pour out your soul to the Hulk. You wouldn't process your daddy wounds with the Hulk. And then by contrast, like let's say you have this, sweet, elderly, kind-hearted grandmother, and she will sit with you and listen with you, and you can pour out anything to her, and she will just weep with you and give you sweet Southern wisdom. And but you're not going to call her up when you get in a street fight, like you do. And but you need both. And here's what's interesting: if you think about traditional religions say, and the way that traditional religions understand God is that God is transcendent, and he is holy, and he is other. And because he is so big, he is distant, he is removed, he's far away. He's that transcendent. He's God. We're not God. For example, I heard this story about a religious panel. Maybe these happen every now and then, where they'll have a group of people they have different representatives from various religions, and they get on a stage and they talk about an issue, or they talk about pluralism or something. And the story goes that there was a question that came from the audience that was asked to the person on stage who was the representative for Islam. And the question was, do you love God? And this person's response, he was confused by the question, and his answer was, I fear God, I respect God, I worship God. But there was a disconnect. The idea of intimacy and where your heart could be connected to God in a personal, loving way was just totally foreign. It didn't compute. It didn't make sense, because that's the traditional understanding of God. God is so other. He's God. This is a being that you respect and you submit to. You don't love. That's traditional religions, but modern religions, our understanding of God is almost the opposite. Modern day forms of kind of the modern gods are that God is whatever you want God to be for you. That God exists as sort of a warm, supportive, unconditional love, unconditional affirmation of you and of your life. These gods are there to support you and to be there for you. But modern people, I don't think, would say, well, my God shifts human history around. My God breaks into the world with power and enters into people's stories and does battle with their greatest enemies on their behalf. There's a disconnect. But don't you see, We need both. We need a God that is big and powerful and strong, and we need a God that is near and dear and will unconditionally love us. Jesus is the only one that gives you both. He's the only one that gives you both. So tease this out for just a second, a couple implications. Because Jesus is powerful and all dominion and rule and might belong to him. You know what this means? This means that when your life is chaotic and spinning out of control, then you can rest. You don't have to engineer outcomes for your life. You don't have to grab a hold of your life and make sure that you're in control. You can actually surrender. You can let go. The only way you can let go, though, is if you are convinced that someone else is at the helm. Someone else is driving the plane. And when you know that Jesus is powerful and strong and mighty, you don't have to be in control of your life anymore. You never were in the first place. And because Jesus is so full of tenderness and kindness and compassion, this means that you can be yourself. You don't have to pretend to be something that you're not before him. You can come to him with all of your shame, all of your fear. You can come completely raw, and you don't have to be worried that he's going to just obliterate you on the spot. We just sang this line in the song Come Ye Sinners in the first verse when it says that Jesus is full of pity joined with power. That's it. Full of pity, full of compassion, joined with power. You have to have both. Because Jesus is mighty to save, you can trust him with anything. And because he's willing to save, you can bring him anything. That's the power that we need and that we have in Jesus. But let's keep going because there's more to this story. There's more to this passage. We also see the purpose that we need. Not just power, but purpose. Let me show you what I mean. Look at this third episode. You see this in verses 35 through 39. This is right after a very long day of ministry, which can be quite demanding and draining. It says that Jesus wakes up early the next morning. It's still dark, so it's early. Some of you have never woken up that early, where it's still dark outside, but it's dark in the morning. And he wakes up very early, and he goes out to a quiet place to be alone to pray. Now, prayer is a lot of different things in the Christian life, but fundamentally what prayer is, Christian prayer, is feasting on the love of God. Feasting on the love that God the Father has for you. And so here's Jesus, and he's drained after this long day of ministry. And what does he do? He prioritizes time to be alone and just bask in the wonder of God's great love for him. And he gets interrupted. Just like his sermon got interrupted, his prayer gets interrupted. One of his friends, a guy named Simon, comes up and stops him and says, "Hey, everyone's looking for you." Which shows you, even at this early hour, this dark hour, there's already crowds of people clamoring to get around Jesus. There is this, that's one of the themes throughout this passage. In every vignette, it makes some note, some mention of the fact that Jesus has gone viral. There are just, it's his celebrity, it's his magnetism. There's just volumes of people that are coming to him. And Simon comes to him and says, "Hey, it's here. The crowds are here." And so I think it's quite shocking what Jesus says to him. His response, did you notice verse 38? Let's go to the next town. Let's leave. Now, you and I would think, wait a second, that doesn't feel like the right PR move. You got the numbers, Jesus. You got the followers. You've got the crowd. This is your moment. Capitalize on it. Let's expand your brand. Let's publish a book. Let's launch a podcast. Let's create some Jesus merch. Let's do the things. You got the people. And Jesus says, I'm going to leave all this. Let's go to the next town. Why? Again, the end of verse 38. So that I may preach there also. Jesus doesn't care about the acclaim and the celebrity and the popularity. What he cares about is his mission, which means what he cares about is people. I need other people who haven't heard the gospel to hear it. So I'm going over there. What does that show you? What does the third little story here show you about Jesus' priorities? He prioritizes time with God. He prioritizes people. God, people, which shows you that Jesus' fundamental orientation is others-oriented, God people. Fame, reputation, celebrity, that is a self-oriented focus. And what you see with Jesus is the exact opposite. That is a little key into the secret of the universe. This is like drilling down into like the meaning of life stuff. What Jesus is showing you vividly is that real life, where real life is found. Real life is not found in grabbing life for yourself, but in giving yourself away for the sake of other people. Let me use an example. I heard this interview with a man named Chuck Klosterman a number of years ago. Some of you might know that name. He's an American author, essayist. He kind of focuses on pop culture. Brilliant guy. He's been interviewed on this podcast, and this must have been 15, maybe 20 years ago now. And they were him and the podcast host were talking about the possibility of being happy. And Chuck Klosterman has 2 young kids when this thing was recorded. So he had a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And let me read you what he said on this interview. Quote, "I am so happy being a father. I'm actually embarrassed that I experienced all the cliched ways fathers talk about happiness. This is what I always thought. I always assumed parents were kind of lying when they talked about how happy being a parent can make you. But here's the main thing becoming a parent does to you. It makes you, it forces you to think about yourself less. I think about how I feel about myself, and I think about how I feel about things way less than I ever did. And I'm beginning to accept that maybe this is the key to being happy, thinking about yourself as little as possible, which is counterintuitive to everything I had ever thought." Now, Chuck Klosterman, I don't know if he's a Christian or not. This certainly wasn't like a Christian podcast, just 2 dudes talking. That would be a great podcast name, by the way. But I think he is tapping into something profound. He is tapping into the way that God designed human beings. God designed human beings to be fundamentally outward-oriented. God, people. You don't have to become a parent to discover that. The problem is our hearts are so twisted, it gets inverted where we really deep down believe, no. Fulfillment and joy and life will come not by me giving, but by me getting. So we really do think, I do too. Deep down, I really do believe that I will be happier if I can get, here's the magic word, more. More money, more square footage, more clothes, more food, more entertainment, more vacation, more whatever. Give me the stuff. And Jesus is vividly showing you, you will be fulfilled when you stop caring about your fulfillment and you give yourself away for the sake of God and the sake of others. That's the purpose that we need. We need to enter into that, get in sync with that. Now, we could just jump straight to the last point, but there's one more observation I want to make about this passage because I just found it too interesting. If you just drill down one more layer, I want you to notice all 4 of these episodes, if you kind of zoom out, every episode flip-flops between preaching, teaching, and healing. So just look at it. The first one, verses 21 through 28, he's in a synagogue, and what's he doing? Teaching. Second one, 29 through 33, he heals Simon's mother-in-law. Third one, 35 through 38, he tells Simon, hey, the reason I'm here is to go preach. Last one, 40 through 45, a leper comes up to him, gets healed. Preaching, healing, snip, snap, snip, snap, snip, snap. And here's why I think that's important. You know, in our modern context, conservative churches, generally speaking, and I said generally speaking, conservative churches really like preaching and teaching, which is to say they really like the Bible and truth and doctrine. Get the word out, yes. And words like social justice, cultural engagement, make conservative churches very nervous, very uncomfortable, because what matters is truth. And then on the flip side, in our modern context, you have progressive churches, generally speaking, which are really focused on what you might say healing and social justice and caring for the poor and defending the marginalized and addressing the systemic issues in our society. But words like absolute truth, the authority of the Bible, these things make people in progressive churches very nervous, very uncomfortable, because what matters is not the truth. What matters is your truth. What matters is love. And so you got conservatives saying, no, what matters is truth. And you got progressives that are saying, no, what matters is love. And here you have Jesus, and he's like, I'm not fitting into these boxes. I don't fit into either of these categories. You need both. Preaching, healing, preaching, healing, preaching. Jesus is unequivocally, whatever that word is, he is that, committed to preaching and proclaiming truth. He's not afraid of standing up and proclaiming the truth of the gospel. And he is committed to serving and caring for people's real material needs. Preaching, healing, truth and love. So if we're going to be a church that walks in the ways of Jesus, then we too can't just pick one. We have to do both. We have to proclaim the truth of the gospel as it is revealed in the Bible, and we have to move towards our neighbors and care about all of their needs, even their material needs. Preaching, healing, truth, love, God, neighbors. That's the purpose we need. Final question, how do we get it? How do we get both of these? Because that's a tall order to say we need this kind of power and we need this kind of purpose. How do you get both? Thankfully, this passage shows us. Look at this last passage, the fourth little story here, which, man, I really do wish we had more time to just devote to this one story alone. This is one of those stories that for me personally has just been so meaningful and profound in terms of its impact in my own life. So I feel gypped that we just have to kind of mention it at the end. But time is of the essence. But look, here's the story. The story is really about a leper. And in Jesus' day, and really still today in some parts of the world, lepers were totally cut off from the rest of society. They're just in it, exiled. And that's because the skin condition of leprosy was thought to be contagious. And so they really had to be quarantined and just sort of off to the side there. So when this leper in this story comes up to Jesus, he is breaking all kinds of social protocols. And that shows you how desperate he is. It says that he falls on his knees before Jesus. He kneels before Jesus. Can you just picture a man kneeling before you, begging for mercy? Have mercy on me. And Jesus, being full of pity, joined with power, looks at him and says, I am willing. And again, he tenderly touches him when he doesn't have to. And the man is healed. Leprosy cured on the spot. And here's what Jesus says to him afterward. Look at verse 44. See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them. Jesus tells this guy who's just been healed of leprosy, I don't want you to go around, don't tell anybody, just beeline it to the priest and show them. And the reason why is because the priests of that day were like health inspectors. They were like the health inspectors, where they looked you over, and if they gave you a clean bill of health, that was your ticket back into society. This guy who had been so alienated, so isolated, Jesus says, I care about that reality. I care about that part of your life. I don't just care about your health, I care about your loneliness. Here's the way that you actually go through the proper channels to get reinstated into society. But here's this man, and his excitement gets the better of him. And look at what he does, verse 45. But he went out and began to talk freely about it and to spread the news so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places, and people were coming to him from every quarter. This guy just goes around and spreads the word. Jesus' celebrity goes supernova viral, and now it is such that Jesus can't even enter into towns and cities anymore, which means he is forced into the desolate places. Now, wait a second. I thought that's where lepers were supposed to be. What Mark is showing you is that Jesus doesn't just heal this man, he trades places with them. Because here's this leper, he was utterly alienated, isolated, cut off from society, and now he is healed, he is restored, he's back with the people, he's walking around, he's freely talking to people, he's back in Jesus, who was once in, freely talking, going from town to town, now he's forced out, banished to the dark and the desolate places. And what you see with this exchange is a direct window into who Jesus is and what he came to do. He came ultimately to trade places with us. That we would be restored in a relationship with God, but that only happens if Jesus was cut off and alienated from a relationship with God. That we would receive life and healing, but only because Jesus was willing to take on our death and our sin. I mean, if you want a great kind of mental image of this, let's think about another Harry Potter story. I mentioned him at the beginning. Why not round it out? Have a whole Harry Potter sandwich here. And at the end of one of the Harry Potter books, I won't say which one, at the end of the book, Professor Dumbledore and Professor Snape and Professor McGonagall, they stumble upon the villain of the story. And they're all shocked when they see this villain because this villain was supposed to have been dead. Everyone knew this guy died in prison years and years and years ago. But they give him some magic potion. This is, Harry Potter world, so they give him magic potion to make him tell the truth. And he tells them what really happened. What happened was when he was in prison, his family came to visit him one day. His mom and his dad came to visit him. And while they're visiting, when the guards weren't watching, the mom drank some magic potion so that she was disguised to look like her son. And the son drank some magic potion so that he was disguised to look like his mom. So they switched, and the guards didn't know. And at the end of their visitation, the mom, who looks like the son, goes into prison, and they close the door behind him. And the son, who's disguised as the mom, walks out into freedom. And here's what he says as he's telling the story at the end. He says, quote, "My mother saved me. She was buried under my name and bearing my appearance. Everyone believed her to be me." Now, why would she trade places with him? Why would a mother give up her freedom, her time, her life for her child? There's only one answer. It's because she loves him. And that love transcends his guilt. She's saying, I know you're in jail. I know you're in prison. I love you enough, though, that I am willing to pay for your life with my own. That is what Jesus does. Jesus looks at me and he looks at you and he says, I love you so much, I am willing to pay for your life with my own. So I will be cut off from the Father. I will be alienated. I will bleed out on the cross. I will become unclean. And in so doing, you who once were alienated from the Father will be reconciled to the Father. And so that you would experience life, and that you who once were unclean would become clean. Jesus trades places with us. When you receive that kind of love by faith, that's how you get the power, that's how you get the purpose. Because it is at the cross where you see the full power of God on display. You see that he was willing to die for you because he loves you so much. And his death is so strong and powerful, it actually accomplishes something for you. You actually are liberated because it does something. And that's where you get the purpose that you need. Because when you really know in your heart of hearts that you are loved with a love that is so amazing, so divine, you fight the instinct to fill that hole in your soul with anything and everything else. You start to see through the lie More sex isn't going to do it. More alcohol is not going to do it. More TV shows is not going to do it. You start to see through the mirage, and you're actually then free to give away those things and give away yourself in the name of loving God and in the name of loving other people. Final thought. Jesus died for you, so live for him. Amen. Let me pray. Father, I pray that you would give us eyes and ears to see and to believe the wonder and the beauty of Jesus. Father, for those of us who really resist who he is because this all just feels like fairy tales or this feels made up or whatever, I pray that you would meet them in their heart of hearts with your power and with your pity, with your compassion. We all need a God, a force outside of ourselves that understands us and is empathetic towards us, yet can also defend us and protect us from our real enemies. And so, Father, I pray that you would do such a work in each of our hearts that this would not just be just another Sunday where we just show up and hear some stuff and sing some songs, but really do meet us and transform us that we might be changed from the inside out to love you, to love others, to be so filled with the love of God that we might freely, generously give it away. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.